This episode of the Tactics Meeting is brought to you in part by Gallagher Marine Systems. Gallagher Marine Systems is the industry's most comprehensive source of full-service, in-depth compliance support. And by the Washington State Maritime Cooperative, the only non-profit umbrella plan holder dedicated to oil spill readiness for commercial vessels operating in Puget Sound and the Greater Salish Sea. Formed in partnership with Washington State in 1995 to protect these waters, WSMC has long stood at the intersection of maritime response and environmental protection, supporting safe commerce while safeguarding the coastlines we all depend on. Learn more at wismiccoop.org.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's time for the Tactics Meeting. I'm your host, Dan Smiley, coming to you from the Hilton Garden Inn by SeaTac as I travel around. And I've got a really great panel for us on the show where we talk about response tactics and technology. I want to welcome Aaron Patterson to the show, Lieutenant with Seattle Fire. Not your first rodeo here on the podcast, but happy to have you. Aaron, tell everybody who you are and what you do for Seattle Fire.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, Dan. So I'm a lieutenant in the fire department, been with Seattle for 25 years. The last 2 years, I have been working on our fire boat. Before that, about half of my career, I was on our shoreside marine unit, Engine 36, one of our specialized companies that focused on shipboard firefighting, tunnel rescue, confined space. And the last number of years, I've been involved in regional marine firefighting training, and I've been working on our rewriting the standard operating guideline for the fire department. Also, have been recently working with the IAFF, developing some curriculum that is going to be coming out very soon across the country to fire departments. And that was kind of in response to the fatality fire in Newark. That was the IAFF's recognized, hey, we need to do something. And so I was fortunate enough to get to be part of that group to put the training together. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that come out. So yeah, thanks for having me on.
I'm looking forward to seeing that training. And you're going to be part of the panel discussion coming up in March of next year for the National Harbor Safety Conference. So I'm really looking forward to having you on that panel. Mark Curtis with Fairwater, also president of the Washington State Maritime Cooperative Board of Directors, which kind of makes you my boss. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure.
And Theo Camlin, my Swiss Army knife of ICS, safety incident commander, operations section chief. You're the guy. Welcome.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
We also have Jim Butler with us today, our intrepid liaison officer, also a lawyer who focuses on emergency response issues. Jim's having trouble with his camera today. He's in Alaska. It's blowing 70 miles an hour at his house, so he may flicker in and out, but I appreciate the intrepid efforts that he is making to be part of this panel this morning. Jim, welcome.
Yeah. Thanks for your patience, guys. Sorry for the tech glitches.
Yeah, no problem. We're having weather problems here in Washington as well. I'm sure you guys have seen all the flooding issues that are going on. Before we start on what is our main topic, which is the one Henry Hudson, I do want to say this does look like it's unfolding in Washington as almost a textbook case on deploying for evacuations and rescue. I've been really impressed with everything that I have read. There have been FEMA deployed early to embed at the Washington EOC. They stood up their support center in Bothell. Washington State asked the federal government for an emergency declaration under the Stafford Act, and the federal government acted fairly quickly to sign that emergency declaration and free up emergency funding. And that hasn't been the case in every emergency around the country in the last couple of years. So pretty pleased to see things working the way they should. Anybody have thoughts?
Being from a distance, all I can do is get the reports from support. So all I can tell you this is it's moving this way, based on my recent moments ago warning from the weather service locally.
Yeah, it's supposed to start raining today again here in Washington, and I'm not sure that it's going to bring a lot more flooding, but I am concerned since the ground is sopping wet that it's going to lead to landslides, which is going to be a whole different problem. So there you go. Well, let's talk about the 1 Henry Hudson. For those who don't know, this was a vessel that caught fire in the port of LALB, Long Beach. Happened on Friday, November 21st. Reports are that the fire broke out below decks. This is a container ship that was at berth 118. And initial reports indicated an electrical fire. And about 200 firefighters from Los Angeles and Long Beach responded to this fire. Reports show that it started as a direct attack on the fire, but after some evaluation, Unified Command decided that they needed to move into a defensive posture, and they shifted to boundary cooling, and that's how the thing kind of unfolded. A number of other things happened that were interesting, but I want to talk about a couple of statistics that I was looking up in preparation for this episode. And one that really jumped out at me is that fire and explosions now account for about 20, have risen 17 to 20% globally over the last 5 years. That's a big jump. Another statistic that jumped out at me is that misdeclared or undeclared dangerous goods are implicated in about 25% of fires. And I was reading an article. About this recently, that the shipping company that owns the ship has announced that they're going to raise their misdeclared cargo fines as they go through this. So apparently, they're already you get a fine for putting hazardous cargo in a container that isn't properly labeled. But it has, I don't know, like an $8,000 fine, but they're doubling it in this case. Mark, you've had experience with this cargoes and these kinds of things. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a tough conversation to have because if you're the vessel captain and you are getting that commercial pressure, let's go, load, and get out. And then you're asking the agents or your own teams, and you said, "Listen, I need all of the manifests. I need to know what's hazardous. I know what we cannot stack on top of each other, because some of the stuff that's coming into that port, they don't come in a sensible order. So those trucks on the highway or the trains that are going directly into the port, they're just unloading, and as the ship comes in, it unloads, it gets reloaded." The captain and that cargo mate have a good idea of what was on board, but it takes that shoreside team to confidently say, okay, this is exactly what's in this container. This is exactly what's in this container. And when the shipper is actually 3,000 miles away, 4,000 miles away, you may not be getting that same level of risk management that you would have here in the United States. And so that container could actually be a lot more hazardous than the original sender alluded to it being. And so I'm not completely shocked that we're getting more and more container ship fires from hazardous materials and chemicals that somebody else didn't have the same risk theory about in the first place. But it's really down to the captain whether or not they're going to prove that they can sail without the appropriate documentation on board. At the end of the day, it is the captain's responsibility to use their stop work authority and say, wait a second, we don't have any documentation for this cargo, but you want us to leave right away because you put it on our ship. It's a very, very dangerous fine line that's being played throughout the industry. It's not LA Long Beach, it's not Seattle, it's not Jacksonville, Tampa, wherever. It's everywhere. And not having that documentation means you also don't have that knowledge, so that God forbid a fire does break out on board your vessel. You may know exactly which container's on fire, but you may not know what's in it if you don't have the appropriate documentation. And they are not allowed to open those containers. So you have all sorts of other rules saying, wait a second, this container's on board my vessel. You said it has this. However, I'm getting temperature readings because I have, devices to measure temperature on board my own vessel, and it's hot in there. What's going on? Or the container starts leaking. We want to know exactly what's leaking out of that container and how we're going to respond to that level of emergency as well. So it's a combination of the original shipper. What happened while it was being transported? Did things move around? Was it not secured? Was it not secured properly? Did containers tip over? And then what's the reaction? What happens after we have either a thermal event or a spill event, and we don't actually have good records?
Aaron, you're involved in the national effort to help redefine training for municipal fire departments dealing with shipboard fires. To what extent have you been looking at the issue of hazardous cargoes in containers, the inability to identify what the cargo is? Has this been a part of the discussions that you've been having?
Yeah, it is definitely. I mean, that's one of the things we've put into the training is identify early hazardous cargo. So utilizing ship personnel, getting the cargo manifest. But I think then we're going to be right up against what Mark was just talking about, where the ship's crew, or whoever we're going to be interacting with, probably the ship's crew, they're going off the information they have. So if that information is um, mislabeled, not listed, then we're just gonna have to fight it from a distance or just take precautions and not really know. Um, I do have a question for Mark. This came up. I was last month. Actually, it was 1 week before the O&E Hudson. I was in San Diego at the Port Partner conference, and there was a gentleman there. He's a retired firefighter from England, now works in Malaysia as a marine fire investigator. And he was talking about this subject, and he was talking about getting the tariff codes for items. So my understanding was it was separate from the cargo manifest. And he said if you look at the tariff code, uh, it's kind of complicated, but he said it'll tell you a lot more accurately what that cargo is. Are you familiar with that at all?
Yeah, because especially in this last year and a half or so, talking about tariffs is there's that's a completely different influence, which is the financial influence that would make a member nation not want to disclose what they're shipping. and they will sometimes run the risk of intentionally mislabeling what is inside a container because they don't want to pay a higher tariff on certain items that they are shipping. So while there is yet another piece of documentation, well, we have a current administration that's just, and Mexico just did it this past week where they put 50% tariff rates on 4 different countries in the Far East. That would make a company that's not on the up and up say, no, that's dish soap. We got 500 gallons of dish soap in that container. We don't know what you're talking about, and something else is leaking out the bottom. So documentation is great, but it's that whole trust but verify.
Okay, so that could just be another place that is mislabeled or misdeclared.
Yeah, so you have the label on the exterior of the container box. You've got hopefully shipping is sending you the safety data sheets for everything that's inside that box. Somebody has accurately declared something as hazardous or flammable, or how they were going to call that particular substance, whether it's an oxidizer or not. You're putting a lot of faith into the shipper doing the right thing. It's not always in the shipper's best financial interest to do the best thing. And the vessel crew, well, they're at the receiving end, so there's some level of trust that needs to exist. And if they don't trust the documentation, that's when they have that stop work authority and saying, wait a second, that's there's no way that's what's in that container. And then you're stopped and you're in a major port, and that ship needs to leave at a certain time in order for commerce to continue. So there's a commercial pressure, there's a financial pressure, but the safety has got to be the number one pressure. And sometimes that's missed, and we end up in some of the situations we've seen lately.
Theo, you were the safety officer for part of the response to the motor vessel Dolly that hit the bridge in Baltimore. Sections laid down across the containers and all the work to try to get those off. Can you speak to the concerns for misidentified, mislabeled cargo, or just hazardous cargo in general that was in those containers? And you're on mute.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Dan. Not to parrot completely what Mark said, the cargo of concern boiled down to 20 or less containers, depending on how you add it all up, and very typically the labeling was to the effect of flammable liquids not otherwise specified, NOS, per the 49 CFR approved wording. The one thing I wanted to also suggest is, sometimes the manufacturer, whether it's right or not right, might be overly concerned about their product makeup and secrecy along those lines, and so they're very happy to list a 40-foot container of Victoria's Secret perfume products as flammable liquids NOS, so that other curious handlers along the transportation route don't break in to steal all the Victoria's Secrets. But those might be some of the considerations on the commercial side of things. But one thing I will point out is that it was well recognized early on about potential hazards that were impacted by the bridge collapse on top of the ship. And in doing so, the Salver had marine chemists on board permanently 24/7 with stationary air monitoring set up, and all the personnel working the salvage piece, as well as those working for the bridge removal, were wearing personalized air monitoring devices. We set initially, immediately, we set the action levels at 50% of the permissible exposure limits, so that any of those were triggered, it was, an evacuation and reconsideration event. And that was an immediate notification to the Unified Command. Other than that, if we were below the action levels, then we got a report from the ship and from the contractors working alongside the ship every evening, and logged them for our tracking. We didn't get to the point where we needed to set up community air monitoring along the shoreline, because it was well contained, in a close proximity to the vessel out there. But that's kind of how that was handled there. Same thing when it got down to Norfolk, and they were doing the removal process down there. Continuous air monitoring, personnel monitors on all the salvors that were there, and all the handlers working the waste as it was moved from the ship to a barge and then stowed on land for further processing.
I think community air monitoring is a good piece to take up next. I mean, with this, not so much on the Dolly, but on the ONE Henry Hudson, we had a pretty significant smoke plume visible for miles that residents could see. All the way up in the Hollywood Hills, this plume of smoke, and of course, people were concerned about uh, what kind of hazards, health hazards that implied. And when you look at some of the cargoes that are known to have been on board, there were some containers that they weren't shipping lithium ion batteries specifically, but they were shipping things like scooters that had lithium ion batteries in them. And when those batteries go into thermal runaway, they start to produce some pretty nasty stuff. And at least in my policy for the Washington State Maritime Cooperative, if the word fire is mentioned by the reporting party, we um, will now immediately activate our industrial hygiene contractor to come in and set up for community air monitoring. But one of the things that I find interesting and that's a little difficult is that what's being produced is not something people normally monitor for. And Jim Butler, you were the liaison officer for the Genius Star 11 fire that we kind of keep coming back to, and our community air monitoring process became pretty well scrutinized by the community. There was a lot of concern about those hazards. Can you speak to that and how we address those community concerns? And you're on mute.
Here we go. You got it now?
Yeah, I got you now.
All right. Thanks for your patience, guys. I ended up transitioning to my phone, so I feel like I'm a 14-year-old here having a video chat. Yeah, we were out there. It seems like the common denominator is cargo ship, fire, smoke, uncertainty, heightened concern by a community, often responders who are dealing with a situation that's unique, or I think as Theo pointed out, the thresholds are different than what you might normally have for sort of like a traditional oil spill type situation. So any information you can have to help make better decisions, as well as communicate what, if any, risk may or may not be present to the public, is pretty critical. The other component that I think is really advantageous is, if done properly and done according to a plan, you can collect a tremendous amount of data, and that data can be used in subsequent situations, whether that's a claim situation or something like that. So, as there's many things that happen when you kind of have one of these more complex incidents open up. You're doing things that can also benefit, shall I say, the response community from an educational standpoint in the future, but also have a better understanding of what may or may not have been some of the impacts associated with the plume, and that helps folks on a couple different levels. So you're right, it is becoming standard, but I think the key is to make sure it is done with a plan that's based on people have a technical expertise and understanding wind patterns, material types, what you're looking for, frequency, density, that type of thing. And once you get that kind of expertise in, you're just going to have a much more credible product and a much more credible air monitoring program.
One of the things I discovered was that often even professional industrial hygiene companies are not traveling with sensors that can directly detect some of the hazards that are coming off of things like the lithium ion battery thermal runaways. And a great example is hydrogen. We routinely have four gas meters that measure for hydrogen sulfide, but not for hydrogen directly. And then we also get hydrogen fluoride that's coming off of these batteries. So I'm wondering about being prepared, about getting new sensors, having inventory that's going to allow us to directly monitor for some of these hazards that we understand. Aaron Patterson, has Seattle Fire begun to look at updating its inventory of sensors on the hazmat team, or is that something that you had already done routinely?
I'm not exactly sure what our hazmat team. I know they have a lot of sensors, but our regular ops companies have four gas monitors. Engine 36 has five gas monitors, with a couple extra things in there. But that's actually wrote a note down when we were talking about that to look into that. So,
Well, I
short
think,
answer is I'm not sure.
right.
Yeah,
If I was taking this from a HAZWOPER instructor perspective, what I would say is, if the answer to what is the concentration of a particular gas that's hazardous, if the answer to what those concentrations are is I don't know, that means evacuation. It's as simple as that. It means evacuation from a firefighter perspective. It absolutely means level B, SCBAs. From a hazmat team perspective, it means level A if you're going in to concentrations of unknown chemicals. And from a plan holder in a shipboard fire scenario, I would consider that to be an unnecessary hazard. That would be a no-go on the flow chart. Aaron, your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a thought about the dolly. A friend of mine was one of the salvers, was working on that, and he was talking about this is well into the operation. They're starting to offload cargo, and he said they ran into a situation where they had, I think it was soybeans, but they had gotten wet, and so they started decomposing, and we started getting um, nitrous oxide, some methane, and it was a hazardous atmosphere that wasn't there initially. So, as far as looking at responders, whether it's a salver, municipal firefighter, that PPE and the continuous air monitoring, even if you've identified like, hey, there's nothing in here, it's just soybeans. Um, that continuous air monitoring is key because you get things like this where you get a product wet, it decomposes, or you get two benign chemicals that mix together that create something. Um, so that's something that responders have to continually do is monitor that air and have the proper PPE.
It's a really good point. Recognizing that what the hazards were 5 minutes ago is not necessarily what the hazards are now. It's easy to get complacent to say, "Oh, we did our hazard assessment. This is what it is," and to think it's going to be static going forward, and that's not the case. Theo, what was your continuous air monitoring like? You said people were actually wearing monitors as they were doing the salvage work.
Yeah, as Aaron pointed out, we had a little stew build up in the bilges on board the Dolly. In particular, during the once it got moved down to Norfolk and they were starting to move the cans off, and soybeans were clearly one of the contributing factors. And any rinse aid or anything like that was captured on board.
Lost Theo temporarily. Oh, it reminds me. I don't know why this popped into my head. I don't know how many of you guys read like sea stories, but I remember a story from C.S. Forrester's Mr. Midshipman Hornblower, where he was given command of a prize that turned out it had a cargo of rice, and cannonballs had holed the ship below the waterline, and when they came on board with the prize crew, they sounded the bilges, and there was very little water in the bilges. So they thought, "Oh, but it's great. Things must be fine." I guess the damage wasn't as bad as we thought it would. And keep in mind, as the prize captain, he's like 18 years old with only modest experience. And as time went on, they continued not to have any water in the bilge, and eventually the deck seams started to expand and crack, and the hole started popping. All that water was being absorbed by this cargo of rice, and they could have done something about it right up front if they had realized. They could have started jettisoning the cargo, but instead, the ship just broke apart underneath them because they didn't recognize that hazard. Little aside note there. Um, sorry, Theo, you were broken up there for a second. Please continue.
No, yeah, it had a little interruption on the old Wi-Fi here. So anyway, long story short, the marine chemists measured down into each new layer of the hold before the responders went in, documented what it was, and then, like we said before, the responders had personnel monitors on them. So if there's any changes, they would evacuate, meet back up on the deck, and reevaluate.
Yeah, that's great. Another thing that I thought was interesting for this event, which I guess is really common, and I didn't realize it. So it's kind of new to me because I'm an emergency responder. I'm not an insurance guy or a cargo guy, but general average was declared for the cargo on the vessel. And thankfully, we have Jim Butler here who can explain to us what does that mean and how common is that general average declaration. Jim?
Sure. You hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Theo and I are in the old guys club when it comes to technology. General average is a concept in essentially salvage, where you have a vessel is considered a common enterprise. The vessel gets hired, and in most instances, it's going to be hauling cargo, and that cargo is made up of a variety of interests sharing a common space in a common enterprise to take that cargo from point A to point B. In the event the vessel has some sort goes to grief in some way, um, there's a salvage situation, or the owner has to undertake expenses beyond those of what was normally anticipated for the common venture, the voyage, then they have a right to make a claim against the beneficiaries, if you will, those cargo owners who get a beneficial interest in the vessel getting to its final destination, with the addition of additional expenses for the owner, unanticipated. So the owner can declare what's referred to as general average. And when the owner does that, they essentially have a lien against the cargo on the vessel, in addition to what it would normally have for just the cost of freight or a tariff for freight. It is not an uncommon development in cargo vessels, whether it is maybe perhaps just a vessel grounding, but there's what could be substantial costs involved, or certainly in the case of cargo fires where the ship has a scenario where there are a lot of different cargoes, there are a lot of different people benefiting. So you end up you're required to post a bond to release your cargo if your cargo's safe. That involves some complexity. You have to, one, have an area for which to do that and a system. So there, as you might guess, are people in the insurance world who specialize in general average type claims and can come in and help those on the side that posts a bond to release the cargo, or those on the owner's side on whose behalf they're making sure that whatever bond or security is put up is going to be sufficient, if you will, to help share the common benefit of the common voyage, which would be the salvage of the vessel. And hopefully, Mark, when you were in the Maritime Academy, that's what you learned when you learned about general average. But it's not nearly as sneaky or surprising. It's just part of the cargo world that most of the people on the response aren't really thinking about. But it's a big deal. Can be.
I've got a little knickknack shop in a little town nowhere, and I've shipped a bunch of little thises and that's from China. Maybe I've got a half a container. How expensive can this get for me? I mean, is having my cargo on the ship that then has declared general average, is this going to bankrupt me?
It depends if you have adequately understood the potential risk and insured accordingly. If you're somebody who's buying little trinkets in a store in some little town, you may or may not be working with a freight forwarder or a cargo handler that has sufficient background to understand those are the risks. We experienced this firsthand on the Genius Star. There was primary cargo was the battery units. There was a secondary cargo, which were metal frames that were going to be built on a cogeneration facility somewhere in like New Mexico. So these when this ship fire happened, they got stuck in Dutch Harbor for like almost 50 days. By the time the ship gets down to San Diego, the owner had declared general average. And even though their cargo was not damaged and it had been 50 days delayed, they still had to post a bond to get it released so that they could protect their interest. It's just part of the way the risk associated with vessels at sea and potential salvage can be borne equally by all those who benefit from a successful salvage.
You could be in really real big trouble if you don't know what you don't know.
Well, I think, and this stuff is going on in many cases simultaneously to people like Theo trying to make sure the crew can safely, get a vessel back underway. Mark is managing the commercial impacts related to his organization. Aaron's got firefighters on the deck, and everybody's like, well, who's paying for all this? Well, there's another opportunity. That's general average, and we're going to see if we can set up a fund to help offset that cost.
That's good. Well, while we're talking to Mark, you had an incident out in English Channel or North Sea or whatever that technically was off the port of Humber. as the responsible party, as the ship owner, can you tell us a little about how that response went? I thought it was uh, super interesting from a number of perspectives, not the least of which was the uh, demonstrated crew proficiency as they responded to that incident.
Yeah, I think one of the most significant differences between what we've been talking about this whole time is this wasn't a container ship. This was an oil tanker. The oil tanker was carrying US government AV gas for aviation, and much much more explosive, obviously. But we knew what it was. We know the hazards that are involved. It wasn't a guess as to how dangerous this cargo could have gotten and how quickly it heats up on top of everything else. The same can be said for anything coming down off the North Slope and you're carrying crude. Crude is not just crude. Crude is about 400 different things. And as it sloshes around inside your tanks, you got to make sure that you understand the heating potential, what's in there, gassing, that sort of thing. So oil tankers are a completely different ballgame when you get down to it. In this case, like I said, it was a government tanker that we were operating. It was sitting at anchor. So what happens is when a ship pulls into a port, the dock is not always ready for you. And so you set out at a approved anchorage, and I see them pretty much every morning here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which is really a tough place to live in during the winter. And they're just waiting, whether
On that note, we hate you.
yeah, it's 80 degrees. So I had to turn the air conditioning back on. But you see the ships; they're waiting to come in. All sorts of cargo ships and dry bulk and that sort of thing. But what you don't see a lot is oil tankers. Oil, especially here in Florida, because there are no pipelines, is a very rapid. Oh, you're ready? Let's go. Come on in. We need everything that's in your tanks. Florida is unique in that sense that they are 100% reliant on either rail or vessels to bring all the gasoline and diesel and the AV gas for the airports and that sort of thing. What happened off the eastern shores of the United Kingdom were that the crew had come in on time. The dock wasn't ready for them, so they went to the approved anchor. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning the next morning, and they're just getting the paperwork done. They're doing what they would normally do when you sit at anchor. And by the way, some of these ships, they sit at anchor not just a day or two, but 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks waiting for dock readiness, depending on where in the world they're going. But in this case, it was a pretty quick wait time, and a container ship came barreling through at full speed. It was doing 17 knots and hit this oil tanker carrying AV gas. And under different circumstances, you would never suspect this to happen. But if you look back in time, and this is starting to come out, this other vessel, this container ship, had made this run 100 times. This was their normal path that they followed through this particular region. It's just not common that there's an oil tanker containing so many barrels of AV gas and limited visibility. It was still over a mile, but limited visibility. And then suddenly you're there. You're directly impacting this oil tanker. The investigation is still going, so I can only talk to what I know and what I've already shared previously, and that is the crew. I think there's a lot of underestimation about ship's crew. And when I'm done with this ship, I do want to talk about the passenger ship industry because their crew are amazing, just as amazing, if not more amazing. But the crew of the oil tankers are trained specifically for their cargo catching fire. The equipment, the outfitting of the vessels is unique because it's an oil tanker. So all the things that we learned over the hundreds of years of building ships, sailing ships, sinking ships, lighting them on fire accidentally, have come to new rules, new regulations under SOLAS. new rules and regulations about standards for training, certification, watchkeeping, what kind of materials you can even make the furniture on board the ship out of, and what the rugs, if you have carpeting. There's so many different rules and regulations because of things that have happened in the past. I'm not saying that the maritime industry is 100% reactive, but I'd say it's 99.9% reactive. So it may be surprising, but the sea was on fire. This fire was so hot. It was the steel on steel as the cargo ship cut through the ballast tank straight into the cargo tank. It was so hot it exploded immediately. It was so hot that all the other ballast tanks along that side immediately blew their caps, and all of that water, that ballast water, evaporated immediately. It was so hot, there was no oil spill. All of it caught fire. The sea was on fire. The ship's crew did exactly what they're trained to do. They went out, they geared up, they set their teams to action, they turned on the water monitors, and they aimed the water monitors at the scene. After about 30 minutes, however, they came to the realization they weren't putting this fire out. In fact, it wasn't getting any better. At that point, the safety of the crew came into play, at which point the captain made the decision, pulled the abandoned ship alarm, got everybody mustered up, made sure everybody's accounted for, had the logbooks, got into the one lifeboat. There's one of those long drop lifeboats, one that I do not enjoy getting into. I don't know if anybody else has done it, but it is not a fun experience. And then for the next 90 minutes, we knew that they were on fire. We knew that there were explosions because the folks at Gallagher called us and said, "Hey, we got a qualified individual call." The second mate let us know where they were, who they were, and then the line cut. So for 90 minutes, we had no idea if they successfully launched the lifeboat. We don't know if the ship was afloat. We didn't know what was on fire and what wasn't on fire. We had no idea how many tanks were impacted. And so those 90 minutes, we ramped up. We did everything we were supposed to do to get incident command post up and running, even to the point of flying some of the leadership team over to the United Kingdom in case the lifeboat came ashore, being ready to receive surviving crew members. We are very fortunate that everybody survived. Everyone survived.
Yeah, that is amazing, and I think it's a testament to the training of the crew. It's also a testament to the construction of these vessels. I mean, years ago, and I want to point out that most of our oil spill regulations and how we plan for oil spill drills and shipboard emergencies are based on casualties from ships that were single hull. They were of older design, ships that simply don't sail any longer. So you said that the vessel was hit by this container ship, that it was hit dead square in the side by this container ship. It was like swinging a splitting maul at around a cord of wood. And if you were to invent this scenario as your worst case scenario for a drill, you would say, well, this, if anything, is going to sink this ship, if anything is going to cause a total loss of cargo, as is identified in the definition of a worst case spill, hitting this ship in the side at 17 knots without even an attempt to slow down, that'll do it. But it didn't.
And it changes my mind and my concept about drill scenarios where if that same event had occurred, but it was the engine room, we'd have lost the ship. Because if you think about it, the cargo does have those ballast tanks around it that, they're protected by the double hull since Open 90. You do that same exact 17 knots by a container ship into an engine room, you're filling a very large volume of space immediately with water. Here, there was already liquid in the space, theoretically. Obviously it caught fire and left. But if you have an open or void space, if this had been another container ship and there was open areas within that container ship, that ship would have been lost because all the water that should stay on the outside was now coming into the inside. The good fortune with the design, to your point, the newer designs of cargo ships that are carrying petroleum and avgas and things like that, is that they are segregated. That in this circumstance, which is the most shocking part, we didn't know this, only one tank was impacted. We didn't have that information for a while. Based on what you saw on the news, what you got out of the media, you would have thought we had lost half the ship. If you look at the fabric maintenance of the side hull of the vessel, you would have think that all of the tanks had caught fire, but they didn't. The interesting thing that we got to watch live, the CCTV footage, they were able to monitor, and there was almost no impact to the inside of the vessel, to the house where everybody was. Very little impact to the engine spaces. The vessel was able to transit to a yard for its evaluation. Obviously, they towed it in an abundance of safety, but when the crew who volunteered to go back on board a few days later and do the assessment said we could actually sail this vessel. That was the condition it was in based on the design and the firefighting tactics that were taken. Now, the weird thing about the tactics is that we weren't in charge of the tactics. So when you're in the United Kingdom, you actually have to report to the UK government. They have all of the authority. It's not like ICS in the United States where everybody participates in a unified command and we agree to things. It's you have to do what you're told, or just stay out of it and let them do what they're good at. And the UK Coast Guard and the UK Navies are actually very good at response, and they proved it over and over again. And this is again one of those opportunities where multiple salvers were involved, multiple response organizations off the UK coast were involved, and this one was a success. From the crew all the way to the last person to bring that vessel into a yard to get it evaluated.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. I did a drill out in the UK once where I was introduced to their bronze, um, was it their bronze, silver, gold process that they use in place of what we call ICS. So at the bronze level, that's local response, that's local fire. At the silver level, that's more like what we would do at a county or maybe a state level, and then gold is when they've elevated up to the federal government, or up to Whitehall as the their incident commander. They don't call them incident commanders. The whole thing is run by their national police. It's run by the coppers. Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. And although they'll let your incident command come in and they'll let you set up ICS, but all the decisions have been made out in the hall by the coppers and the emergency responders ahead of time. And that you can speak in their meetings; it's spoken to, but you're not the incident commander. Not even close. Not even close. I want to speak to the engine room thing because I don't know if that's completely true. Like, we have a number of vessels that are sailing in and out of Washington that have they have split engine rooms, like, right, port and starboard engine rooms. You literally have to climb out to the main deck, cross over, and go back down again. They are completely or virtually completely isolated. So in those cases, you might be able to take a hit there. Not only wouldn't you sink the ship, but you might not. You wouldn't. You shouldn't even completely lose propulsion or steering. But I guess it depends on what trade those vessels were built for, whether they're actually designed for that, because that's not always. It's not necessary. It's not always the case. I'm
No,
assuming that.
but Sorry, I was using the same scenario. We're talking a single screw,
Oh yeah.
one engine. And if that space had been breached, that would have been worst case casualty. Water would have been coming in at such a rate that no pumps would have been able to maintain. And yes, you can then isolate the entire engine space and just let it go. But I can't really say that it would have survived if it had been that engine space.
And you
And
lost the fire pumps too, right? So when they abandoned the ship, the fire monitors were still running,
correct, they
right?
were running off the generators, and the generators had enough power for at least 3 more days to keep that fire pumps going, the fire monitors going out on deck.
And
So
that
it
probably
was
was what
continuously
one of the
moving
things
out.
that saved the ship, right? Is that they got those
Oh,
fire monitors on there, and it kept without that the heat would have spread, the steel would have failed, other tanks would have become involved, and that would have been the end of the ship.
and again, it's that theory that, hey, we're talking about putting liquid where with liquid would have been. On a container ship, that's the opposite. Container ship, if you continue, or a fishing vessel or any other vessel where you are increasing the amount of water inside the hull of a vessel that is meant to keep the water on the outside of the vessel, that is devastating to your stability of the ability to flip the vessel. As you have experienced yourself, the the nature of the oil tanker and exactly where it got hit, you can put as much water there as you want because it's not adding to the total volume of the vessel. And anything that's out on deck is going to just run to the scuppers and over the side, which is where maybe you would get a pollution event, but in this case, it didn't happen.
Yeah. Well, dewatering, it's got to be right there at the top of the decision flow chart. I saw a picture of the ONE Henry Hudson, the water in the one cargo bay. It was almost to the deck edge. So I'm assuming that naval architects did calculations and said, yeah, you can keep pumping water; it's going to be fine. But it was a pretty incredible photograph to see that much water in the cargo bay without. It sounded like no dewatering took place. We'll know later though. Uh, Aaron, if you've been working on your SOPs, have you been addressing dewatering? Is there a trigger point where you're starting to talk about dewatering? I know that I've talked to my oil spill response organization that responds under the WSMIC plan. And if there's a fire, I'm going to ask them to bring in, 20 back trucks. We won't start doing the dewatering, but I'll be turning around going, Aaron, when we get to that point, Lieutenant, I got 20 vac trucks sitting over here. We're ready to start pumping water when you're ready to have us.
Yeah, it's definitely consideration right up at the top. There's kind of an acronym that kind of built into our decision tree model, and for the first in officer, that's kind of one of the 5 questions I have, which starts out as it's faces, fire, what and where, accountability, is everybody accounted for, confinement, has the crew contained the fire, extinguishment, has the vessel crew used the fixed fire protection system, and then the S is stability. So um, are there any concerns? Is it stable and safe to board? And then one of the first tasks for Engine 36, our shoreside marine unit, when they come up, is to take initial stability readings and then monitor throughout. And then they will also be tasked with working with ship's crew to implement dewatering. So as soon as we're going to be flowing water on the ship, simultaneously we'll have a plan for how to get that off, or are we going to just contain it on the ship and work with experts to determine how much we can flow. Because once you start figuring out, okay, we're flowing X amount of lines, either it's an inch and 3/4 or 2.5, you start adding up the weight, the gallons per minute you're adding, and it can add up pretty quickly. So,
Well, and
and
is
that's
it all
something. Look, So
When it's not all going in the build, it's not all going into the lowest part of the ship, right? It's going into intermediate decks. It's adding weight high where the center of gravity, where where G goes over M, or Mark, is it M over G? I'm trying to remember.
Let me have a
Grav
look at it. I'm definitely.
Gravity over metacentric height over gravity. I'm trying to look at my stability book in my head. But you can get there much more quickly than you would ever imagine.
oh, for sure, yeah. And that's something. So our standard operating guideline is, it's like 4 pages, so it's pretty concise, and it really just directs the initial setup of the scene, kind of what information you need to get, kind of guides the initial tactics. Um, but along with that, there's a reference document that's more like training that I'm still working on it. I'm currently up to like 60 pages, but that gets into a lot more. Goes into the free surface effect, some ship stability, kind of a little bit more of the um, the why behind some of those tactics. So things like utilizing the boards to get water off, make sure the scuttles are clear. Um, or different tactics like maybe cutting a hole in one of the decks and just getting the water lower in the ship to buy you some time. Um, so the training document kind of gets into uh, some more of those tactics.
It's kind of a fine line, I think, too, because in the oil spill world, there's decanting, which is it's the same concept, but it's different, right? When you're talking about a ship and a fire, your stability becomes a big thing. And in most instances, except for maybe some smaller vessels around more of a marina type, but if you're around a port, you're going to have vessels that have salvage marine firefighting components to their vessel response plans. So you should have the expertise available. Those providers are required to have line drawings of the ships available. They can make those calculations by people who do it on a daily basis pretty quickly. And I think it's important. While I mean, I've learned over the years being in the liaison function of public information, I can speak to a lot of different things, but that doesn't necessarily mean I know how to do it. And I think it's important to, if you're in a situation where you've got a vessel, it's going to have a vessel response plan, you really lean on that expertise, because that's what they're there for. And particularly with technology, they can tie in pretty quick to a dockside facility while they're moving. But um, I get pretty nervous pretty quick when people start trying to help and get ahead of their skis instead of slowing down and just getting the right people in the loop as quick as possible. And I think when it comes to fire, particularly because you see things burning, people want to put the fire out. And sometimes that might not be the best strategy, depending upon what you're dealing with. Um,
Yeah,
so that's why I think it's important to tap those resources and get them into the equation as fast as possible, because ultimately the owner is going to be making some decisions, and the owner is going to be held responsible for whatever happens. So
yeah,
it's important that those resources get made available and utilized.
absolutely. Um, Kind of along those lines, I had a meeting last week where kind of turned over the initial draft of our this standard operating guideline, and we sort of talked about what the training would look like, getting it out to our fire department. And one of the things that we came up with was um, specifically focusing on training for the chief level that are going to be at incident command, because it's so different than our normal operation.
Yeah,
One of the things we kind of came up with was a kind of a sim lab where we have a simulated fire, and just to really drive home to them that, like, hey, this is different, and there's going to be these experts that you're going to want to rely on, people that are going to come up to your incident command post that you're not used to having if you just have an apartment building fire, commercial fire, or single family residence. And so one of the ideas I had was, and actually maybe throw it out to everyone in this group here, is at least for the first one to kind of get some uh, to kind of get it down, is run a simulation and actually have a real QI representative from Don John Smith or Resolve or TNT as the representative from the SMFF. Have a ships agent, have all the real players there, and sort of be participate in that sim lab so that we can kind of capture what are the questions that they're going to be asking when they come up, what are the things that they're going to want to know, what can they bring, um, and then we can sort of use that script then to recreate that sim lab and to run all of our command level staff through that, just to really get that training of like, hey, these are the players, this is what they can bring, these are the questions that they're going to ask when they show up. So I think that's going to be a real important part of this, is driving home that this is not something that we're going to be able to handle on our own.
Well, you bring that up. You were instrumental in helping WISMIC put together our firefighting seminar and drill this last June. And we've already scheduled next year's exercise for June 10th with a day of training on June 9th. And though we haven't started planning, we are going to run a similar scenario to this year's. So I haven't reached out to you yet, Aaron, but I'll throw you under the bus right now. I'm hoping you're going to be on our design team, and maybe this is your first sim lab.
The timing might work out well, yeah.
Yeah, June 9th, we'll have the classroom a portion. We'll arrange for the salvage marine firefighting contractor. We'll have naval architects. We'll run through all of that, and then we're going to actually run a full day, full command post exercise on the 10th, starting at 2 or 3 hours into the incident, so that we've actually moved up to the command post. And I'd love to design it so that it aligns with your SOP. And we'll get our salvers in there, and it'll be great. So
one thing I'd add to that is, and I might put Mark on the spot since it's 80 degrees in Fort Lauderdale, but if you're going to try to train senior command, I think sometimes it's better to have a conversation sort of around the kitchen table or the campfire than in a group of 100 people. I mean, if you're going to have corporate people or senior leadership people, they have to be able to let their hair down, talk about the problems, figure out, oh, we don't have the money to do this. How can you expect us to come and deal with a cruise ship on fire or this, and really, really have that family conversation with the leadership, because not only do you want to get some training, you want to identify some gaps, be honest about what you can and can't do to fill those gaps, and what you can or can't do as a practical matter. Because when you get into these ship scenarios, the laws are completely different. It's not like you're just going into a building that's on fire at a dock. As soon as you cross the mooring lines, you're in a whole different world. And I think it would be beneficial to get as much awareness level training as I think what Dan's talking about, in some hands-on to get a sense of the vibe. But I think it's also important to have that internal hard knuckle conversation about, can we do this? Should we do this? Why are we doing it? How are we going to do it? It's all amongst us, because at the end of the day, you're going to be looking at each other. You're not going to be looking at everybody else, right? And I think that's and Mark, I'm sure you've been in a couple of those meetings with your companies where the corporate people have to say, well, wait a second, we can't do that. We don't have the space or the time or whatever. So don't let the big training get in the way of that good rubbing elbows with the folks, is all I guess I'm trying to point out.
Yeah, 100%. So we just did the leadership media training, and it's very, very small group of humans. And I even excluded myself from being in the room because there's sometimes that they just don't want to look dumb. They may not have ever heard of some of this, so you kind of give them, to your point, Jim, that capability to say, "I don't know what I don't know. Don't make me look bad in front of the group." Well, at other times, it's, "Hey, let's go to this giant seminar because none of us know about this, and be really, really helpful if we knew X, Y, Z." And I'm glad you brought up the cruise ships because it's a very misunderstood part of our industry. I worked and sailed on cruise ships for 18 years. And one of the things that people don't understand is there are entire fire departments on board those vessels, depending on its size. Yeah, a small cruise ship going in and out of the port every day may only have its base crew of 5 or 6 people. But when you get into these newer, larger, where you have 10,000 souls on board the vessel, you're going to have upwards of 150 firefighters ready to go at all hours, just waiting for the emergency signals to activate. They're all trained, they're all certified. They've gone through different maritime academies, some of them here in Florida, the Resolve Maritime Academy, or in their own home countries, and they practice it every single week. It's a very different circumstance as you get the more and more professional mariners on your vessel, that they are trained up to help. And they probably will already have that fire put out before you can get there, depending on the situation. So I'm going to end my section on what if you can't. So there was a vessel that was going from Baltimore all the way down to the Bahamas on a cruise. And at some point in the evening, we ended up with a cigarette butt that was still ignited being tossed overboard. You get that vacuum effect as the ship's moving through the water. It landed on the back deck of the vessel where all the mooring lines were. It took about 2 or 3 hours to catch actual fire. It's kind of like a mattress fire where it's just heating up and heating up and heating up. Well, these lines caught fire. Now you've got multiple decks of the back of the ship, and it's at a pretty much a 45-degree angle. If you've ever seen the back of cruise ships, they tend to have this nice sloping so you can have more cabins with not looking down on other people's cabins. And in this case, the heat on that mooring deck where that what they believe cigarette butt landed got into those lines, and just got so hot that it melted the next deck. Now, the next deck was heavily warped and melted. That's where the crew would have their relaxation. It's called crew deck. And then it moved its way further and further up the back of that ship, um, to the point that the ninth deck was a pure glass walls, all melted and blew out. That's how hot the fire was in this ship. And now the ship's fire teams are putting out the fires as they come across them, but they couldn't get to the initial point where the fire started. And this comes back to ship design. The ship design had a drenching mechanism for your mooring deck for this very thing. Unfortunately, the trigger for the drenching system, and this is an older ship, this is something born in the 1990s, but the drenching system handle was actually on the mooring deck in the fire scene itself. So, how do you get the water when you are underway hundreds of miles from land? How do you get the water or even understand what the fire looks like if you cannot access the fire scene itself? At one point, the chief security officer's name was Armando. Armando went up and he got the harnesses and all of the ropes and everything for the rock wall and rappelled down the back of the ship with a fire hose to try and put eyes on and trying to put water on the initial scene. Uh, that's another good example of a ship's crew being very well trained, being innovative and adapting to the situation. And they did put the fire out. When they got to the first location, it was Freeport, Bahamas, which is where they could then go and dry dock the ship and send all the guests home. Just hundreds of millions of dollars in damage because they couldn't get to the scene. The only reason we had a better idea is that some of the ships kind of follow each other on the similar courses. And one of the other cruise lines wasn't too far behind, and they're like, "We think you're on fire." The captains, yes, we are. We are most definitely on fire, and they were able to give them some concepts and ideas as they closed the gap between the two ships as to where the fire really was, and that allowed the initial fire crew to be able to concentrate their efforts. So again, I'm going to end on that one. I'm not giving out any names of companies or ships, but you can probably find it pretty easily.
Right. Well, we've been going down for a while. We should probably wrap up and let everybody get back to their Sunday. Aaron, I'm going to reach out to you to start designing this drill. I'm hoping that Seattle Fire will be on board with doing this again.
Yeah, looking forward to it. That's sounds great.
And Jim, any final thoughts before we go?
No, it's always an interesting lap around the concept track, I guess, as we talk about these things. I know that, I think the takeaway I always get is there's always something to learn, and there's always somebody who's probably willing to share it with you if you just ask and let them know that you're looking for some additional information. And
A lot of planning going on around this, right? It's the Sector Columbia River has started or is starting.
Coast Guard has a big initiative underway on a national level.
At the local level, Sector Columbia River is putting together a firefighting subcommittee that they just announced. They put out a charter on that recently, and it's a lot of different efforts going on. My only concern there is there's a lot of scattered efforts going on, and I'm not sure that that's helpful.
Well, it's important to make sure that the people who are, as Mark was saying, sort of the experts of the ship, the experts of the industry, aren't excluded, because it's not an agency problem. It's a broader problem than just a fire department wanting to know how to go in and try to put water on something. So I think it's important for them to work with non-traditional partners, whether that's other agencies or whether it's the shipping industry or some of the specialized skills in the shipping industry. They need to make sure they get the benefit of that.
Theo, final thoughts?
Oh yeah, thank you. I appreciate a good conversation this morning, gentlemen, and apologize for the interruptions internet-wise. But other than that, I'm glad to see Aaron is shepherding the the learnings because the crossover between marine fire and facilities is definitely something that we need to hone in on. So to that end, I'm meeting with our TFC down in Corpus first of the year, and just chat about their processes, given that that's the refinery terminal fire corporation that was whose inception was for supporting terminals, but now that's kind of transitioned to the entire Port of Corpus Christi. So I'm going to see what I can find out from them and where they're going, and I'll keep you posted.
That's great. I believe Corpus Christi is hosting next year's National Port Partner Emergency Response Summit.
I hope to see you there, Aaron.
So yeah, absolutely.
Lieutenant Patterson, who's becoming one of the leaders in this shipboard firefighting space. Any last comments?
I don't know about a leader, but it's one thing I've learned is I've been willing to ask questions of people, and I have learned a ton from people like you guys. And kind of a motto that I've really leaned into for myself for the last few years is just if an opportunity comes up, I say yes. You want to be in a podcast? Yes. You want to go to this conference? Yes. You want to come do some training on our ship? Yes. And it's amazing the doors that has opened, and just the relationships that have come out of that. So I'm just grateful to be a part of this, and yeah, I'm looking forward to the training in June. And yeah, just it's important to get all the different players together and learn from each other, and just prepare for the next one.
Well, you've been a great partner, you and Seattle Fire, along with Captain Katka and Chief Collins. I couldn't ask for more, and I look forward to continuing the work that we're doing. Gentlemen, this is the end of this episode of the tactics meeting for today. If anybody has questions or comments or a suggestion for a topic, you can email us. Our email address is podcast@thetacticsmeeting.us. Everybody go have some fun, especially you, Mark, since you're out in the sunshine. We're out.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.